This is the lecture on sound. Sound is actually one of my favorite aspects to filmmaking and actually just movie watching in general. Without sound, the movie watching experience would be very different than what we get. And to me, sound is basically a character, whether I'm talking about music or sound effects or even the small Foley sounds that kind of go unnoticed. Sound really does kind of give us a separate entity to kind of round out and fill out what we see on screen. In this lecture, we'll be going over those important concepts to know, again, diegetic and non-diegetic. We'll be talking about the general attributes of sound, talking about very specific non-sync and sync sounds, and also talk about music and other different sound properties. So going back to those, again, important concepts to keep in mind as it pertains to sound with diegetic and non-diegetic. Again, diegetic are things characters on screen can see and hear. Non-diegetic are things that are intended for the audience and characters on screen cannot see or hear. And as it pertains to sound, so in the case of this, diegetic would be things characters on screen can hear. Non-diegetic is things on screen characters cannot hear. So things that would fall into diegetic sound would be other characters, dialogue scenes, explosions, things like that. Non-diegetic would be the musical score or the soundtrack. And there is a difference between musical score and a soundtrack. Musical score is a composed score, usually with an orchestra or done through a musician and a MIDI player. Honestly, today, one of my favorite scores is actually from Mad Max Fury Road, where we see kind of, that kind of synth score coming back into play. Soundtrack is actually based around popular music. So when you hear popular songs within a movie, that's usually what we would refer to as the soundtrack. But again, these are those important concepts to know because a lot of what we are going to talk about as it pertains to sound centers around diegetic and non-diegetic concepts. Some general attributes of sound. One, it's a very powerful sense mode. Again, I don't think the modern viewer, the layman viewer, really understands how much sound kind of pushes their perception of an image and alters that perception of the image. I can't imagine watching a film like Jaws without hearing that low tumbling John Williams score, or even a film like Psycho, the shower scene, and the score that accompanies it really kind of adds to the viciousness of that scene. So sound itself is an extremely powerful sense mode, and it isn't just music. It's also those quiet moments. Those quiet moments can add quite a bit to what we're seeing on screen. Sound also alters how we perceive the image. Can you imagine watching a Star Wars film without seeing the ignition of a lightsaber or hearing the laser sounds, or watching a horror movie without kind of that gross wet sound when somebody is stabbed, or an action film without explosions? Those things really alter how we perceive the image. If you were to go to a nice theater and watch the movie versus watching it on your phone, the sound itself is going to just change your viewing experience. Sound also directs our attention. So Jaws is a good example of that. Anytime we hear that score, that dun 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 dun, we know what's coming. So it draws our attention to it. And within most movies, each character is going to have some sort of musical kind of theme. And whether or not we notice that theme is there. It lets us know when that character's coming. When the villain usually comes on screen, you're going to get a different type of music. So it directs our attention to things. And then obviously, when you're looking at even just Foley art and those kind of sound effects, that crack in the woods of a horror movie, it draws our attention to that area of maybe the frame, So if we hear it on the left side, it's going to draw our attention to the left side. Sound can also set up our expectations and foreshadow things to come. Obviously, the music in Jaws, I hate to use that as an example, but it's a really good example of setting up expectations. Once we hear that music, once we associate it with the shark, anytime we hear it, we're going to think of that shark. So setting up expectations and foreshadowing things happens quite a bit in movies. And a lot of times it's either through atmospheric sounds, or it can also be through just like little sound indicators that they give to the audience that a character is coming on screen. The Dark Knight itself, when a Joker comes on screen, his music is and his theme is very kind of this almost tone, this kind of mid to high pitched tone that kind of just follows with him. So anytime we hear that, we know he's coming.
Look at me. So I had a wife, she was beautiful, like you, who tells me I worry too much, who tells me I ought to smile more, who gambles and gets in deep with the sharks. Hey, one day they carve her face. We have no money for surgeries. She can't take it. I just want to see her smile again. I just want her to know that I don't care about the scars. So, I stick a razor in my mouth and do this to myself. And you know what? She can't stand the sight of me. She leaves. Now I see the funny side.
As you watch this clip from Glory, pay attention to how the music itself kind of contributes to this kind of climactic moment towards the end of the film. The voices, the choir, and how it builds and builds and builds as the platoon kind of tries to take over this fort. Now, getting into specific types of diegetic and non-diegetic sound. The first type of diegetic sound that I'd like to talk about is what we call sync sound. Sync sound is something that comes from an on-screen source. So this is where we can kind of see the individual or the thing that's causing the sound on screen. So it's in sync with picture. This can be the voice, dialogue of characters. It can be the music, the sound of a radio or a band playing. It can be sound effects. These are things that are recorded either in the field or on a Foley stage. Field recording gets your large kind of sounds and can kind of pool different sounds together. Foley artists, what they do is they recreate all the sounds of characters and anything they touch. They record their footsteps, their clothes, anything they interact with, and that's done in post-production. ADR, automated dialogue replacement, is the replacement of dialogue in post-production, and approximately 95% or more of dialogue is replaced in post-production. And this actually also includes breath, believe it or not. When you kind of hear people talk on screen, all that's been replaced, including how they breathe and when they breathe. And a lot of times this is done months after production has finished, so actors are coming back in and trying to get back into the role and figure out what their emotional pinpoint was during that scene. In the following video, it's a real short one. It's just kind of gonna go over, what Foley artists do and how they function. And then it will be followed by another one that breaks down even more, looking at Jurassic World, how they came up with all the different sounds of the dinosaurs.
Foley artists. We create the sound effects for things that characters do, and we usually do them inside the studio. We're going to do a scene for the dinosaur, the little baby dinosaurs hatching. And so we need a sound of the egg cracking, the wet sound of the egg inside, and then one of the major characters gets the dinosaur little baby in his hand and sort of pets it and wipes the goo off. So Foley comes in and does all of those sound effects. These large ice cream cones will end up being the egg cracking sound. The cantaloupe is more of the wet sound. We'll put a little goo on this, and this becomes the dinosaur skin. And then the editors come in and make it absolutely perfect. Mixers mix it perfect, and then you have the end product.
Come on, Lynn. Very good. Push. Push. Very good. Push. Come on. Come on. Come on, Lynn. There you are. There you
Jurassic Park movies are great for sound designers because there really is nothing either harder or more gratifying than to make a creature seemingly come alive. Doing dinosaur vocals in the first movie really came down to recording lots and lots of interesting sounds and then collecting them and sorting them and layering them and turning them into dinosaur vocals. In the first one, the park hadn't opened yet, and so we didn't make a movie about a park with 20,000 people in it. In this one, it's a working park. And so we're putting those two things, dinosaurs and lots of people, together.
I was involved from the very beginning. Colin reached out to myself, and I had another sound designer work with me, Pete Horner. Pete and I worked with Colin on Safety Not Guaranteed, and I had worked with Colin on a short prior to that, so we had that history. And so Colin reached out to us one day, and he said, "You need to get on Jurassic World because dinosaurs," and, it was like, let's go.
My role in Jurassic World was as a consultant. L. Nelson and I would talk about the process, how we approached doing dinosaur vocals in the first movie.
He was an amazing advocate and a huge help. And one of the things was get new recordings. Not just because you need new stuff, but because it will provide you with inspiration. And that's where Gary would give me lots of great suggestions. You know, you need to find baby animals. They don't really know their voice yet. Sick animals. So searching for those unique vocalizations. You know, it took a lot of time and a lot of research and a lot of just going out day after day, hanging out with a microphone in front of interesting animals. It was all about waiting for that magical, surprising sound from the animals.
So what's this thing made of?
The base genome is a T-Rex, the rest is classified.
Colin's just so excited to find this new mutant thing. He definitely wanted it to be not right in the head. And this thing is bigger than the T-Rex. And so it was this amalgam of high squealy sounds combined with the weight and the body of this Rexy mutant. So I needed both ends. So I have a handful of animals that I found that I was really inspired by. Then for the high stuff, the squealy stuff, I started looking. I definitely used some dolphin because there's dolphin in raptor. But I looked for other animals that were squealy and a bit off. With those recordings, I then started putting together these roars. You don't want to get messy. You don't want it to just sound like 10 things all layered on top of each other. So as we're taking all of these recordings and all of these different elements, it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Your second type of diegetic sound is called non-sync sound. This comes from an off-screen source. So sync sound, on-screen, non-sync, off-screen source. So this is again voice or dialogue that L and J cut. Can be a person on a phone. It can be music, sound of radio or band playing off-screen, or sound effects or atmosphere sounds. So atmosphere sounds would be, if your characters are in the jungle, would be kind of those jungle sounds that you would hear. They're off-screen. We don't see the creatures. We don't hear, we don't feel the wind, but we hear the leaves rustling. We hear kind of the insects crawling around and chirping and all those type of noises. So those atmospheric sounds are really essential to helping create a live scene and a feeling that you're in that location. In this clip from Gremlins 2, pay attention to the way that diegetic sync sounds work with the non-sync sounds. Specifically when the elevator comes to a stop, how the gremlins become that non-sync or off-screen source.
Elevator, stop! Sound alarm.
Non-diegetic sound, remember, diegetic characters on screen can hear, non-diegetic characters on screen cannot hear. This can be the voice of a narrator. It can be music composed by a musical score or popular music soundtrack. It can be music used to contrast the visuals. Kubrick was very keen at doing that. It can also be music that can Mickey Mouse or mimic the situation. And music itself, as I previously stated, is a character. Each character in a story is going to have a theme that plays out musically. In this scene from Back to the Future, pay attention to how the music Mickey Mouse's things that are going on in the sequence. Specifically when George McFly punches Biff.
Hands off. Oh, I think you got the wrong car, McFly.
George, help me, please.
Just turn around, McFly, and walk away. Are you deaf, McFly? Close the door and beat it.
No, Biff. You leave her alone.
All right, McFly. You're asking for it. And now you're gonna get it.
Biff, stop it! Biff, you'll break his arm!
Give me a hand, Original. Ow! Damn it, man, it's like my hand. Whose are these? Mine. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
You're gonna break his arm! Biff! Biff! Leave him alone! Let him go! Let him go!
Something else you can do with sound is mix diegetic and non-diegetic elements for kind of the audience entertainment. You see this happen a lot in Mel Brooks films where he will have, in Blazing Saddles, as the sheriff's riding across the western frontier, we hear this kind of western music and he comes across the band. So originally it starts out as kind of this non-diegetic music that turns into diegetic. He does it in Spaceballs as well, where you see a character playing the timpani drums, which is, a staple to science fiction music. One of my favorites is actually this clip from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, where we have what is clearly diegetic music with Groot that kind of also turns into non-diegetic, where it's really intended for the audience. The other fun thing about this music is it really contrasts with the visuals going on in the background.
Spit it out! Spit it out! Come on! Disgusting!
When looking at sound, you can also look at sound's very specific properties. One is loudness. How loud is the sound, or how soft or quiet is the sound? Those properties can do quite a bit with, just audience perception of the image. The louder something is, the more startling it can be. Where those softer moments, though, that can really drive forward and push something home. The absence of sound can also do a lot to kind of alter the image that we see on screen. 2 would be its pitch. Is it a high-pitched sound like the score from Psycho, or is it a lower-pitched sound like the score from Jaws? The timbre of the sound, that's the original quality of the sound. For example, if I play an A on a flute, it's going to sound different than if I play an A on a tuba. It's the same note, but the notes themselves have a different timbre to them. And then you can also have different acoustic treatment. This is adding effects to the sound, distorting the sound, altering the sound. In this clip from The Wizard of Oz, you can really see the difference between what the original recordings of the Munchkins were and then what they were like after the acoustic treatment. And that does it for the lecture on sound. In this lecture, we covered, again, diegetic and non-diegetic. We covered non-sync and sync sounds. We also covered non-diegetic sounds. We also went through the general attributes of sound and how it's such a powerful sense mode. We talked about sound properties and loudness, pitch, etc. Next, make sure you move on to the editing and sound learning activity. In this, you will watch a clip and you will point out 2 elements each, 2 from editing and 2 from sound, and be specific. Again, make sure you say what the element is, you define that element, and express how it added to the overall effectiveness of the scene.